On this Sunday night, getting ready for the border to reopen. The relief, the reluctance, and the red tape.
It's a huge expense.
The slow road back to normal. The investigation into a deadly concert.
The families of those who died and everybody affected deserve answers.
Why weren't safety measures in place? Getting hospitals to go green.
Our single-use dominated supply chain has created incredible vulnerabilities.
What it'll take to overhaul the system. And taxing billionaires. Should the ultra-wealthy pay a bigger price?
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. In a matter of hours, fully vaccinated Canadians will finally be able to drive to the U.S. It's been a long road to get here, nearly 2 years since the border closed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But there are still some speed bumps causing travelers to be cautious about making a beeline to the border. Ross Lord has our top story tonight.
After the first widespread closure since the 9/11 terrorist attacks 20 years ago, getting traffic moving again on both sides of the Canada-U.S. border is a milestone. But moving isn't the same as moving freely. Cross-border travel is still expensive, like the Canadian requirement for PCR tests proving travelers don't have COVID-19. The tests can cost up to $300 Canadian. Almost 2 years after he and his family were separated from their travel trailer in the U.S., BC resident Rob Widdowson is not as excited as he'd like to be.
Bad enough paying dues for 2 years and not being able to use it, and now tack on the cost of the PCR test as well, and it's a huge expense.
And possibly an obstacle to reopening border economies. Many Canadians are already hesitant to mingle with their American neighbors, especially in communities where masking and distancing are lacking.
I still think there's going to be a great reluctance by Canadians and Americans to come on across the border en masse like they used to. That'll take months and may take years for that to be recreated.
The Canadian Chamber of Commerce says with the vast majority of travelers double vaccinated, PCR tests are redundant.
For that type of traveler, it is a requirement that doesn't need to be in place.
Canada's top medical authority, Dr. Theresa Tam, says the PCR test should be re-examined. But others note it's the best single tool for limiting the spread of COVID-19 through travel.
The question is, of course, how much additional bang for the buck does it offer? That is unclear. The data, to my mind, is not plentiful. It is not convincing. But I think it should remain in place for the meantime while that data is collected.
Inching forward on the return to normal at a price. Ross Lord, Global News.
Disturbing new details are emerging about the Travis Scott Music Festival in Houston, Texas. Now one of the deadliest concert tragedies in U.S. history. Video shows Scott continuing to perform for 37 minutes after police and firefighters responded. 8 people died when fans rushed to the stage. The youngest victims were 14 and 16 years old. Jennifer Johnson has the latest.
Flowers, candles, and cards have been placed outside Houston's NRG Center, the site of the Travis Scott's Astroworld Music Festival, where 8 young people were killed when a crowd of fans surged toward the stage Friday night.
I'm honestly just devastated.
Scott, one of music's hottest young stars, took to Instagram. As reports surfaced, the rapper continued to perform for over half an hour while first responders were administering CPR and picking up bodies. Videos do show Scott at one point stopping and asking security for help.
Anytime I can make out, anything that's going on, I stop the show and, help them get the help they need.
But it's not the first time there's been trouble at one of Scott's concerts. He pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor in 2015 after fans jumped a security barricade at a Chicago concert, and a second misdemeanor after Arkansas police say he urged fans to rush the stage during a 2017 concert. Festival goers say Friday night's event was chaos.
Everyone was just going down, people were getting trampled. It was just terrible all around.
I had my water backpack on, and I'm fortunately was used to the squishing, so I just thank God that I'm alive.
Houston police are investigating whether people near the front of the stage were drugged after reports a security officer was pricked with a needle.
He was reaching over to restrain or grab a citizen, and he felt a prick in his neck. When he was examined, he went unconscious. They administered Narcan. He was revived.
Live Nation, the concert promoter, reportedly did not use the PA system or video boards to broadcast any safety messages. Multiple investigations are underway.
The families of those who died and everybody affected deserve answers, and that's why I'm calling for an objective, independent investigation.
Live Nation provided 755 security officers, in addition to over 520 Houston police officers, to handle the sold-out crowd of 50,000. But it wasn't enough to stop this tragedy. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Security forces in Baghdad are on high alert following an apparent failed assassination attempt of Iraq's Prime Minister. Mustafa Al-Kadhimi was not hurt in the attack on his home, but a number of guards were injured. Canada is among the countries condemning the attack and calling for calm in that country. Mike Drolet reports.
The remains of the attack speak to a devastating explosion that damaged the home of Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa Al-Kadhimi. It was a modern-style incursion. 3 drones laden with explosives swooped in on the house, 2 of which were shot down by security forces. The third wounded 6 members of Kadhimi's protection force. Kadhimi appeared on camera shortly after, unharmed and resolute. My house was targeted by a cowardly attack, he said. The cowardly missiles and the cowardly drones do not build our nation and do not build our future. Iraq has been caught in political upheaval since its October elections were outright rejected by Iran-backed Shia militias, which have since camped out in tents near Baghdad's Green Zone, the heavily fortified area that's home to Kadhimi's residence, as well as Iraqi government offices and international embassies. Kadhimi is Iraq's former intelligence chief and is considered to be close to the U.S. He's also tried to ease regional tensions by hosting talks with Saudi Arabia and Iran. That, combined with his election win, led to protests that turned deadly on Friday between pro-Iranian demonstrators and security forces. Those same demonstrators suggested the attack on the Prime Minister was a calculated move by the government itself. They did this to distract people from what happened Friday when they killed innocent people, says this protester. The one thing we do know, no group has claimed responsibility for the attack, leaving tensions dangerously high. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
The Canadian government is pulling non-essential staff from its embassy in Ethiopia, where there are growing fears a year-long conflict could spread to the capital. A huge crowd of government supporters rallied in Addis Ababa in a show of support for the country's military. Ethiopian forces are battling rebel fighters from the northern Tigray region in a war that has already claimed thousands of lives. Global Affairs Canada says the situation is rapidly devolving, but the embassy will remain open to help Canadians in need of emergency assistance. Later this month, Merck's COVID-19 antiviral pill will undergo more trials in the UK. All trials so far have been done with the unvaccinated. The next phase could help researchers understand how the pill will work in the wider vaccinated population. Last week, Britain became the first country in the world to approve the potentially game-changing pill. Medical experts say that vaccines provide the best protection against COVID-19. Canada has one of the highest rates of inoculation in the world, but there are some communities lagging behind. In Toronto, there is particular concern for the Indigenous population. Kayla McLean reports.
Unfortunately, if they do catch it, they're going to suffer the worst.
Jonathan Winnick understands intimately the elevated risk COVID-19 poses to his people. The Indigenous leader also understands why many in his community are reluctant to take the vaccine.
There's been a lot of mistrust, a lot of talk about what the government's intentions are.
According to a new report, only 55% of Indigenous people over the age of 15 in Toronto have been fully vaccinated against the virus, leaving roughly 32,000 people without protection. All this despite the fact that urban Indigenous people were granted faster access to the vaccines.
I think it's tied to the fact that 1 out of 3 First Nations, Inuit and Métis people living in the City of Toronto doesn't have a regular healthcare provider, and of those that do, there still may be some gaps in a trusting relationship with those healthcare providers.
Dr. Janet Smiley, a Métis physician and main author behind the report, says the mistrust is deeply rooted in a history of abuses, racism, and wrongdoings by the healthcare system against Indigenous communities. And while the fears are well-founded, it's leaving community members vulnerable.
I'm worried that it's going to be a difficult winter.
She predicts with the Delta variant and gradual easing of restrictions, 30,000 partial or unvaccinated Indigenous people could become sick with the virus between now and May.
Because of the wear and tear of colonization, that our people are more likely to be hospitalized and pass away from Delta.
Smiley says to increase vaccine uptake among Indigenous groups, vaccine information needs to be disseminated by the community for the community.
When we have access to community-run testing, which we started with, good communication, information sharing, and community-run vaccination, that can overcome some of those trust barriers.
Smiley is also calling on the city to increase Indigenous representation in public health agencies to boost trust. Global News reached out to the city for comment but did not hear back before broadcast deadline. Smiley also encourages Indigenous people who are hesitant towards the vaccine to reach out to organizations like her own to answer their questions and address their anxieties. Kayla McLean, Global News, Toronto.
Coming up, how to get hospitals to go green and still provide safe care. And the scary moments over Vancouver International Airport that led to a rare tornado watch.
You ever seen that before? Never saw that before.
Vancouver residents were at the edge of their seats yesterday when a waterspout hovered near the airport, triggering an ultra-rare tornado watch. Environment Canada's short-lived alert warned of a potentially life-threatening situation. The storm grazed the University of British Columbia's campus, but only caused minor tree damage and power outages. Environment Canada says it is investigating the severe weather. BC and Quebec have won international leadership awards at the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow. The awards came from the Under 2 Coalition, which is a global organization of about 260 regions and states. It honored the Clean BC program for most creative climate solution, aimed at reducing industry emissions. And Quebec won for climate partnerships for its collaborative climate action and financially supporting climate goals for regional governments in developing countries. They're also talking about making health care greener at COP26. In Canada, the medical system contributes to about 5% of annual emissions. That involves the use of ambulances and single-use items. To change the sector, it would be a massive undertaking. And as Jamie Maracher explains, right now, this country may not be prepared to take it on.
After every Canadian surgery, tens of thousands of them each year, all of this becomes garbage, says Vancouver surgeon Andrea McNeil.
Our single-use dominated supply chain, which has been a fairly wholesale shift in healthcare over the last 3 decades, has created incredible vulnerabilities.
And pollution.
Up to 80% of emissions from the healthcare system derive from the supply chain.
The rest comes from things such as ambulance rides, aging infrastructure, food waste, and even from medications releasing stored up gases.
If we want to leave our kids a livable planet, we need to emergently decrease greenhouse gas emissions.
The UK's National Health Service is well on its way to its lofty net zero target, finding success by switching to electric ambulances and less carbon intensive drugs. Back in Canada, some hospitals are making upgrades where they can. At Michael Guerin in Toronto, the team tackled aging HVAC and modernized lighting.
We are still not there. We have still more work to do.
Work that costs money. Ottawa has set nothing aside to create greener hospitals. That, a health ministry spokesperson says, is up to provinces and territories.
I do think that part of the issue with healthcare is just how many people it touches.
And the many problems the pandemic has further complicated. Hallway medicine, staffing shortages, and of course, the treatment backlog burden. McNeil prefers to look at the upside.
And the nice thing about the COVID pandemic, if I can even call it that, is that it demonstrated to us the agility of healthcare systems and actually confirmed that when we need to, we can pivot.
Ignorance, she says, will only perpetuate climate change and its negative health effects, sending more patients to hospital in the years ahead and eventually overwhelming our already struggling healthcare system. Jamie Maracher, Global News, Toronto.
Still ahead, billing the billionaires, the push for taxing the world's ultra-wealthy.
And you can see
luck is not on the side of 4 astronauts with the SpaceX mission. They were supposed to wrap up their 6-month mission on the International Space Station and return to Earth today. First, bad weather has delayed their departure to Monday. And get this, the capsule they're coming back on has a broken toilet, so they'll have to wear diapers for their 8-hour journey home. Ooh, rough ride. The cost to launch just one of those capsules is roughly $55 million per seat, a paltry sum for SpaceX's multi-billionaire owner Elon Musk. But as the world's wealthiest see their fortunes expand beyond Earth, they're still taxed in the U.S. at lower rates than the average person. As Jackson Prosco reports, there's a growing push for a special wealth tax in a country that's produced more billionaires than any other.
There's never been a better time to be a billionaire in America. The ultra-wealthy have seen their fortunes skyrocket. The collective wealth of the top 2, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, has risen by $140 billion so far this year. Yet they and other billionaires pay no tax on those gains.
Everybody in this country that has been blessed and prospered should pay a patriotic tax.
That inequity can be chalked up to the fact that assets are not considered income until they're sold. Billionaires can pay themselves a relatively small salary and simply borrow against their immense wealth on paper to live large and largely tax-free.
You might be able to borrow money from your local bank and spend that to live a lavish lifestyle and enjoy all of that increase in the value of your stock without ever having to pay tax on it.
That's why some U.S. lawmakers are floating the idea of a billionaire's tax, one that could pay for trillions of dollars in planned spending. The proposal would target the 700 richest Americans. That's anyone with more than $1 billion in assets or who makes at least $100 million in annual income.
I don't want to punish anyone's success. I'm a capitalist. I want everyone to be able to, if they want to be a millionaire or billionaire, to be able to seek their goal. But all I'm asking is, pay your fair share.
Tesla's Elon Musk scoffed at the idea, tweeting, "Eventually they run out of other people's money and then they come for you." By some estimates, Musk would owe $50 billion over 5 years if the proposal passed.
I think what it does address is what many people feel is a pretty important unfairness or inequity in the system.
There are, of course, questions about whether such a specific tax would be legal or feasible, which has left the proposal on hold for the moment. But as their fortunes continue to grow, America's richest people will all but certainly face pressure to pay more to reflect how much wealth they've amassed. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Up next, a chance discovery at a thrift store returns some long-lost Canadian honor. Take a look at this. Dozens of colorful hot air balloons filled the skies of Turkey's ancient Cappadocia region this morning. It's one of the country's most popular tourist destinations, and it's easy to see why. The balloons take off every morning for tourists to catch the sunrise and glimpses of the unique volcanic landscape called fairy chimneys. Remembrance Day will hold a different meaning to many Canadians as we honor those who paid the ultimate sacrifice. But for one family in Winnipeg, that day will now bring extra special significance, thanks to some diligent detective work in Calgary. As Gil Tucker reports, it's all thanks to a chance discovery in the back of a thrift store.
They get all kinds of things coming into this Goodwill donation center in Calgary.
Books, clothes, toys, electronics.
And then one day this past summer, Jonah Henderson comes across something really special.
I actually just found the medals, Canadian Forces on it. I'm huge into history, so I thought this kind of stuff is pretty important.
He turns it over to his managers, and the detective work begins.
We found the initials JT and last name Hearson with
just 4 letters, Sask. We found an obituary of a John Thomas Hearson, that he was born in Nottingham, England, and then had immigrated over to Canada and had settled in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. We tracked down other names from within that obituary. We came across a grandson.
I didn't really know that he had the medals. So what a surprise for Kelly Hearson in Winnipeg.
It's absolutely wonderful. It's just an absolute honor to have them, and I am just so thankful to Alberta Goodwill for reaching out, for taking the time and making the effort to find me.
It was just fantastic, like, to know we found a family member. It's a really heartwarming feeling.
Medals J.T. Hearson won for his service in both World Wars.
We will look after them, have them displayed prominently with the others that I have. I have medals from my father and also from 3 uncles. We are pretty blessed, and it was their sacrifices which got us where we are.
Jonah is also grateful for his family's service.
My great-grandfather, he fought in World War II. And I actually have all of his paperwork from World War II.
And he's glad to have played a part in getting these medals back where they belong.
Very, very satisfying. It's a joyful thing.
Gil Tucker, Global News.
That's a great story. And that is Global National for this Sunday. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, your Canada is the sun rising over Bird River in Manitoba. There are so many beautiful spots all over Canada, so please keep sending your pictures to viewers at globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Donna Friesen is back tomorrow. Have a great night.